Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Finding Financial Fitness Show. I'm your host, Nino Gonzalez, joined by my co-host, Pei Chen, and a very special guest, Bryce Conway of 10X Travel. Bryce, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm well, Nino. Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here and talk about points, miles, and whatever else comes up, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. So if you guys are listening to this show, where I did an episode on episode 8 with Pei, talking about the basics of travel hacking using points and miles and just kind of an overview of it. But first and foremost, I want to recommend people, if you're listening to this episode, you're likely interested in points and miles. The best place to start is 10X Travel. So 10xtravel.com. Bryce has this free course where I cannot explain the examples that you give, the analogies about the bar and about, playing chess. They're so relatable. And I think that makes it so easy. So first and foremost, if this is your first time hearing about points and miles, highly encourage you to take the 10X Travel course. Listen to episode 8 of this show where I kind of broke it down, gave some examples of some trips that I've done with different points. So start there. But Bryce, to get us started, tell us about the major ecosystems when it comes to points and miles.
Yeah, great question. So points and miles can be thought of as existing in kind of different ecosystems, as you will, because they behave differently, but in certain ways that are similar to other types. So I guess there's kind of two ways to answer this question. I'll start by talking about the different types of points and miles, which I think is what you're referring to. The first one being transferable points and miles. This is the most popular ones, the best ones by pretty much all opinions. Most commonly, you Chase Ultimate Rewards, American Express membership rewards, Citi Thank You points, Capital One miles, Built points. These are points and miles systems that are generally connected to a bank. You can earn their points and miles from many different cards, and all of them go to like the same account, if you will, at the bank. And then when you go to redeem these points and miles, there's lots of different ways you can do this. You can transfer them to a handful of airlines and hotels that are called transfer partners. You can book travel directly through bank travel websites or portals at a fixed value per point, allowing you to use your points for anything. You can redeem them for gift cards or cash back, usually at a bad value, but that option is there. But that is the biggest thing, transferable points. If you take nothing else away from this podcast, know that earning and focusing on transferable points is a game changer for broader points and miles strategy. Beyond that, more commonly, you'll find airline miles. This is what most people are familiar with. American Airlines miles, United miles. These are things that you earn just by taking a flight, signing up for a loyalty account. And what they don't tell you, but you eventually figure it out, is that you have to do a lot of flying before you earn enough miles to actually do something worthwhile with them. But that is an option that's out there. You have hotel points, which is the hotel version of airline miles. You earn them for staying at hotels. And then you have like cash back, which is, I guess you could call it a category of points, but here's the entire story. It's cash back. You can redeem for cash back. And what most people assume is like, oh, well, I would rather have cash than travel, right? I'd rather have $100 cash than $100 of travel. But it's not a one-for-one trade. Cashback tends to be considerably less lucrative and therefore not a great option for most people who are actively paying attention. So you have those different types of points and miles. Again, transferable or bank programs are the ones you want to focus on. I can go into like some of the details of each of those major programs if you'd like, but I wanted to first pause and see if I was heading in the right direction before I get too far down that trail.
Yeah, you definitely were. And I think sometimes when people are initially starting out, especially our listeners who are coming from a money-making investment background, they hear about 0% credit cards and they think, okay, well, this is a good opportunity to leverage 0% money, or I can get cash back, and well, more cash equals more money to make. But where I'm coming from and where I mention with Pei all the time is, okay, let's say you make a lot of money, let's say a few $100,000, and you ask people, what are you planning to do with that money? A lot of people will say, well, then I'm going to travel. So what they do is they sacrifice and they forego traveling to save up a bunch of money to then eventually go travel. And I think this is such a good way with points and miles. If you can understand the value of points and miles, you can start traveling and start living the life you want to live earlier on by having some crazy and wild experiences. So go ahead, keep going with what you were saying about where you were going to head with it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one thought that I'd add kind of before I go down that rabbit hole is that I'd kind of spread the general idea that most people have a warped view of what points and miles is. It used to be me before I kind of got into this. You'd hear people say things like that, like points and miles will kind of change the way you travel. It'll save you quite a bit of money and kind of fit within your broader personal financial efforts. And you can always find a reason why it won't work for you. They're like, all right, well, I don't really travel that much already. So you can assume that that disqualifies me. Doesn't matter. I don't make a lot of money in my job. Doesn't particularly matter. Or I'm not super savvy with like kind of loopholes and systems and such. It's way easier than you think. So I would just say to anyone who's out there who's listening and thinking, I've heard of points and miles before, I have these thoughts about it. Just know that in most cases, the perception that you have of the hobby and why it won't work for you is often incorrect. So give it a shot. But to talk about kind of the different ecosystems, the biggest ones to kind of get back to your original question, or where I spend most of my time focusing my points efforts, are the bank transferable programs, and specifically Chase Ultimate Rewards and American Express membership rewards. These are the two, I'd say, biggest and most popular points programs. They're the ones that the pros are doing because you can get the most value out of your points and miles. The reason why these particular programs, and I'll start with Chase first, are most popular is because they have a long list of transfer partners in which you can transfer your points to one-to-one. So with Chase, I believe it's about 12 of them, airlines and hotels. Kind of just off the top of my head, you have Southwest, United, Air Canada, JetBlue, Emirates, British Airways, Hyatt, Marriott. You can, with a few clicks of the button, take any Chase Ultimate Reward point and make it into any one of those other points. So the kind of visual that I like to paint for people who are familiar with maybe airline or hotel specific credit cards is as if you took like 12 airline hotel credit cards, right? You have a Hyatt credit card, a Southwest card, United card, British Airways card, and you just like smash them all together into like one super card that earns any of those points. That's what Chase Ultimate Rewards are. So if you're using any of those branded cards and you're like, yes, I like my Southwest points or I like my Hyatt points, great. By earning Chase Ultimate Rewards, you're effectively doing the same thing. They can become either of those points as well as many other types of points. So that flexibility and ability to transfer them one-to-one to all those different partners gives you so many options to redeem these points at huge value. You're not just cashing them in for cash back or for gift cards. You can take what would have been the equivalent of, say, $200 cash back, and you can book a Hyatt room that would have cost $500 or more per night. That's where the outsized value kind of comes from. But the flexibility is the key. American Express membership rewards is kind of the same idea, just a different set of transfer partners, and of course, a different bank and all the cards that earn them. And I can kind of jump into that one next. Amex has more transfer partners than Chase. I think it's about 20. There are some actual common overlaps that can both transfer to Air Canada and British Airways. But with Amex, you also add on like Delta and Hilton and a handful of other carriers that many people are familiar with. So many different options to redeem those points. When you go to redeem them, you're going to find outsized value just because of how many different vectors of attack that you have. And of course, the secret behind all of this is you can have both. People kind of paint themselves in this corner like, ooh, which is better, Chase points or Amex points? Like, which is better, like a high yield savings account or like a health savings account? Both, right? They each have unique pros and cons. It's a different tool in your toolbox. And if you want to best prepare yourself, you want to have multiple of these different types of points and ecosystems, and of course, as many as you possibly can. I mentioned earlier that each of these points ecosystems has a variety of different cards that can earn their points. There's another vector of attack for you. So it's not just, hey, I have my one Hyatt card and that's my only ability to earn Hyatt points. Like with American Express, for example, you could have the Platinum card from Amex, which is like maybe the most iconic, recognizable card out there. Amex Gold, Amex Green, Blue for Business, and all the business versions of these cards. And as you're using these cards, earning spending rewards, etc., the points are all adding up into your one single account. And of course, they'll add up quite quickly as you have more cards and more use, and especially if you're a business owner. Same with Chase. You have Chase Sapphire Preferred. You have the Chase Inks, of which there are multiple of them. You can open generally all of these cards. You can use them for different purposes. They'll have kind of different pros and cons in terms of how many points they earn on certain spending categories, etc. But as you have like these multiple cards and these multiple points ecosystems, you're just going to have a lot of points that can do a lot of different things. And that's where you open up the ability to really travel well.
Yeah, I think that's such a great summary. And people oftentimes, when I'm vocalizing it to them, they tend to get stuck on, okay, well, what card do I get? And of course, recommend the Chase Sapphire Preferred, the Sapphire Reserve to get started. But I always reference the 10X Travel best cards list, because every month you guys will upload and update the best cards list. And if you don't know where to go after the CSP, then go down that list. And I would always say, like Bryce, you guys always teach, make sure you're getting the transferable points first. get as many as you can of those and rack those up. And that's typically the first problem is where people start. But then once they get started, and I know I'm speaking for Pei here in this example, they're racking up the points is not necessarily the difficult part. It's once you understand the ecosystems and, okay, I'm going to focus on Chase for the time being, and then I'm going to focus on American Express. Now you have these points racked up, and maybe you have 200, 300, 500,000 points. And then you ask yourself, like Pei's asked me before, when do I get to use these points and how do I get to enjoy them? And that's kind of where I wanted to pivot next is, all right, you have a stash of points. You mentioned they could be transferred to airlines, they could be transferred to hotels. What's the general consensus of where to start? Do you start with flights or do you start with hotels? And if you start with flights, do you start with economy or do you start with business? Talk to me a little bit about those trends that you're seeing.
Yeah, great questions, and kind of a lot of ways I can go from there. To kind of answer the question directly, most people start with flights because you're generally going to get a higher value in your points when redeeming them for flights. Flights tend to be more expensive than hotels, especially when we're talking about like premium cabin, business class, first class, international flights. Those are, 10, 15, upwards of $20,000 to book if paying cash. But I think perhaps more importantly is that you always have to remember that the goal of using points and miles is to do the things that you want to do. If you want to optimize to get the most value out of your points, I can help you do that. You're probably going to fly an Emirates first class flight to Dubai, which is incredible. But taking a half step back, do you want to go to Dubai? Like, do you want to fly over an ocean? Like, maybe you want to take your kids to Disney World, right? So I'm always hesitant when people, especially in the points and miles space, like some of our competitors, will first optimize for that value. Of course, it looks good. You can kind of show the numbers and show the pictures of you on a plane with a bar that's kind of blinged out in gold. But I would encourage everyone, first let the desired travel or like your end goal lead, and then make that happen with points and miles. Once you do that, though, flights are going to be generally your better value. I typically, when booking an award trip, will just book the flights first, even without the other pieces filled in. And sometimes, even if I'm only booking a one-way flight, like if I know, hey, I want to go to, Europe, I want to go to Paris with my family, I will go out, redeem my points, one-way flight from, the US to Paris, book that before I even start to fill in the rest of the gaps. It does require like a bit of managing moving parts and assessing how much risk you want to take there. But it's not overly difficult to fill in the other pieces as you go. And many times doing this is going to give you a better value because you can jump on a deal that you find versus waiting for like all the pieces to kind of fall together. And then when redeeming your points to kind of like get the most value out of them, a lot of people will tend to kind of ask about it or default to like, just tell me like the one best way, like do this and then always gonna get that. And it's tricky because it's just not how it works. The value is going to come from somewhere, but it's going to be a different place each time. And the only way to know is to kind of search all of the options and compare them. So we've talked about how these major programs, Chase Ultimate Rewards, American Express Membership Rewards, they have, 12 to 20-ish transfer partners that are a variety of brands you heard of and some that you haven't. And as much as it's tempting to try to get a shortcut, like, I'm going to Paris, which one do I search? Like all of them. Maybe not Southwest, they don't fly to Paris, but pretty much all of them, right? So you run an award search on Air Canada, you run an award search on Air France, these are all transfer partners, on British Airways, on Emirates, on JetBlue, and United. And then you start comparing those prices. And then just like any other comparison shopping, pick the one that works best for you. And again, there's the temptation to pick the one that's maybe like the most expensive, which is a bit like saying like, all right, I have a free drink coupon at Starbucks. I'm going to go get like a triple venti mochaccino, extra shot, 3 pumps of vanilla, sprinkles. And then it's like, yeah, congrats on redeeming that for an $18 drink. Do you want to drink that now? Like, no, not really. I actually just wanted a tea, right? Same thing here. So you have to kind of balance those things, but there's no shortcut to kind of just comparing all the options and choosing what's best for you, all things considered.
So here's my question, right? Because I consider myself a beginner in this realm, right? So I feel overwhelmed, even though I went through your course and I've, already I got my cards, I got them ready and I've been, using them. I've been storing up my points. Now it's to a point where, I want to take a vacation. I want to start using them. I know that 10X Travel has that service where they help you. I'm one of those people, right? I don't think I can sit there and compare 5 different options, right? And try to figure this out. Can someone just do it for me?
So yeah, so short answer, yes. We do have a service where we have a team of kind of the best points and miles pros on the planet who are standing by to help in that exact scenario. It's like, hey, I got all these points. I generally want to do this. Like, here's kind of the guardrails around my trip, when I want to go, where I want to go, how many people, et cetera. Can you just like run all the searches for me? And we can do that. And candidly, I do that for a lot of my trips now. It saves time and effort, and I know that I'm in good hands. But I don't want to answer like your question about feeling overwhelmed with just like a commercial, like, yeah, pay to solve it, right? You feel overwhelmed about your personal finances, just pay an advisor, right? There's got to be some sort of thought given to trying it on your own. And I want to dig on that a bit, because you use the word overwhelmed, which is like one of those super common terms that we see that people coalesce around in our hobby. And I'm gonna try to guess the situation that you find yourself in, and let me know if I'm on the right track here. I'm guessing that you have like very little or perhaps even no experience yet in redeeming your points, but you're looking at these kind of complex redemptions where we're using a point system you might have never heard of. We're probably transferring to an airline that you might have never heard of, and we're booking like a partner flight, and it has like all these weird terms and jargon, right? Am I kind of on the right track here?
Correct, right? I've
Yep.
done some redemption, but for example, I've done like I got JetBlue points or Southwest points, and I just redeemed directly with them. But I've never done like using the consolidator with the converter. I don't call them currency converter type situation, right? Where I'm moving this point to this Chase container, and then I'm going to then redeem it. That for me is kind of like, what am I doing, right? So, and and I'm also afraid, this is another thing that I'm afraid of, like by the time I've done all my research, that one flight that I was like looking at is already gone.
Yeah, and that can happen, which certainly doesn't help the learning process. But just to kind of speak to that a little bit, this is one of the most common kind of situations that we see our readers in. They get excited, earn a bunch of points, and it's relatively easy to earn a lot of points, even if you don't dive headfirst in this hobby. But then you're in the spot where you're like, wait a second, it's time to redeem. And for the first time, it's not as simple as I have this type of points, so I only search in this type of place, and there's no other options, right? It's like I have a gift card that works at more than one restaurant. Where am I going to eat? And this is where, like, especially the more I do this, I start to kind of throw out like the super logical, tactical, like, just like follow this process and you're going to do it. And I start to lean more into like the psychology and like the comfort level of that learning process. So it's a lot to kind of take this type of points and search like 15 different options for your flight. And you don't even know if what you're looking at is like good or not, because you probably never ran a search with what start super simple. And I would encourage you, like, redeem points poorly. Like, clip that. Bryce Conway from Text Travel just said redeem points poorly. But like, let's take the Chase points, for example. They only have 2 hotel partners, Hyatt and Marriott. So if you just say, okay, my next hotel that I have to stay at, I'm just going to run one award search on Hyatt and one on Marriott. And I'm going to transfer my Chase points to one of those 2, and I'm going to book it. And as like super simple as that sounds, like when I say that from a rational perspective, I find that that's like a mental barrier that people have to get past before they can start doing the more complex stuff. So you do it, you transfer it, you cash in your points, and then there's just something that unlocks in the brain that's like, oh, that's how to think about points that have multiple uses. And then now maybe you go and you search 4 or 5 of the airlines, compare. And then eventually, much more quickly than you might anticipate, you get to a point where you're pretty comfortable saying, all right, I'm going to run 12 different award searches in the next 20 to 30 minutes. Like, you'll get pretty good at it. And redeeming these complex points feels a bit like trying to find where you want to buy a TV from. You search Amazon, you search Best Buy, all your options are like, yeah, it's cheaper here, let's do that one. And it will eventually become comfortable. But I've spent years kind of like pounding down the rational side, like, yes, search all the options, follow this checklist. It's super easy. And like, it's mildly effective. But when people get to those kind of mental barriers and get over them, doing your first redemption with a relatively simple search, I find that that kind of accelerates things. So don't be afraid to redeem your points poorly, to kind of have an overly simplified process where you're really just using training wheels in a way, because that is going to get you to the point where you're like, well, do I want to do a partner booking with Emirates, or am I going to transpace to Air Canada and book like United, like Sabre flight? Then you got to walk before you can crawl.
And I think that's so well said, because
sorry,
crawl before you walk.
I got that backward. Yeah.
Once you're able to start, and even like you mentioned, doing what's called a quote unquote poor redemption, which again, if you've earned these points, chances are you've earned them through a sign-up bonus, which they weren't yours in the first place anyways. So that's still better. It's essentially still a free stay. So keep that in mind. So that way you can practice. And then once you're running those award searches, what Bryce said is correct. You start realizing very quickly, okay, I'm in Dallas or I'm in Houston or I'm on the West Coast, and you start realizing what airlines are going to Europe as a really good example. And once you start doing them over and over and over again, you start realizing, okay, British Airways, Air France, Flying Blue is where I'm going to go. Okay, so here are my places, and you just keep running them over and over and over again. I do want to go back to the booking service because I've used it personally multiple times. And for me, when I was first getting into it, I was like Pei, I was very overwhelmed, and I was desperate to just learn. And what I needed was like a learning coach. I remember you and I had our sessions when you sign up for the 10X Travel Plus membership, just learning a little bit more strategy. But then also when I used the booking service, they were able to say, hey, here are your options. And then I could ask questions. Okay, you found me a United flight, a British Airways flight, and a Air France flight. How did you find these? And where are the transfer partners from? And it allowed me to almost reverse engineer it so that in the future, I say, okay, well, now I feel comfortable enough to do it on my own, to the point where now when I'm looking at Europe trips, I know where I'm going. Now it's the next step for me is Asia. Asia tends to be a little bit more lucrative, a little bit harder to redeem. So I used the 10X service for my trip to Japan, which I broke down in previous episodes. And then I used them again for my next trip to Asia, which will be in Bali. And I learned a heck of a lot from that experience of getting from the US to Indonesia. And that was just a lot of fun. So like you mentioned, crawl before you walk. And as you're redeeming and as you're practicing it, I think it does become very helpful. There is one thing that I learned from the course or one of the podcasts where you mentioned you can have 2 of 3, but you can't have all 3. Can you go over the place, the date, and the time where people they get really stuck in this?
Yeah, absolutely. And to give some kind of quick context at first, this is a frustration that virtually everyone encounters when they go to redeem their points and miles. They'll typically approach it and they'll say, you know what, I have like a family of 4. I want to take them to like Florida or Disney or some popular destination, and we have to go during spring break. And like, oh my goodness, why is it so hard to redeem points? Or why are things so expensive? Well, because you're traveling on the same days as everyone else to the same place as everyone else. There are trade-offs with points and miles that exist in all travel, but the 3 that we mentioned, and we say choose 2 out of 3. You can pick the dates that you want to travel. You can pick where you'd like to travel. And you can pick like the value that you'll get from redeeming your points. You can generally choose 2 out of those 3. Getting all 3 is like driving to work and every light is green. Like you might see it sometimes, but don't count on it. But generally optimize for 2 of 3. So if you know that you want to go to Paris and you want to get a good deal on points, great. You're going to have to be flexible on your dates. If you know that you can travel on spring break, like March 10 through 20, and you want to get a good value for your points, great, you can probably do that, but you're not going to pick where you're going to go. And you can see how you kind of just end up choosing 2 out of 3. So approaching it with that mindset really helps to like set the expectation of how you can end up cashing in your points, what you're going to get out of them, and hopefully avoid that frustrating situation of like, why can't I get a dinner reservation in New York City near Times Square on New Year's Eve? Like I'm frustrated, like, yes, because everybody else is doing this. So there is that trade-off to be aware of. But sometimes you do get like the golden unicorn and you just run a search and you're like, wow, the thing I've always wanted on the dates that I wanted is available right here in front of me. Like amazing, like point to sky.
It sounds like you just have to be flexible, right? Like if you have a set criteria and you have like a X number of people, then you can't always achieve that. And you just have to stay flexible if you're trying to use points. And like Nino says, right, these are our points that you earn. They're like free
money anyways,
right? So it's free, so you can't be mad that you didn't get what you want.
Well, some people still are, and they tend to email me about it, and as if I did this to them. But yes, so flexibility definitely helps. But I would kind of go back to what we were discussing earlier about like let the want or the destination lead. If you can come to me or our award booking service with a pile of points, and we could tell you 30 different ways to redeem them to do something really amazing in a day. But if none of those 30 things are something that you sought to do, you're just cashing in coupons for something that you weren't going to buy anyway. So always like let don't be too flexible with like your wants, like, yeah, but the more flexibility you have built in, certainly is going to help with redeeming points and miles.
So let's pivot into partner reward bookings, because we've talked about, we've earned the points. We've talked about kind of different, the two of the three options that we have when it comes to when we're looking at traveling. And now we're thinking, okay, well, I know I have an idea of where I want to go. This is the next part where I think people will get hung up. This is a little bit more advanced. So if you earn Chase points and you see, okay, on my Chase portal, I can transfer my points to United, or I can transfer my points to British Airways. It makes sense. Okay, I transfer those points. Now I'm going to book it using my United points to book a United flight. You'll find options and opportunities there, but you can find even better bets when you have partner award bookings. So can you mention, first of all, what partner award bookings are, and what are some of the most commonly used partner bookings that you see in this world?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the areas of the points and miles space that leads to that word overwhelmed. So I do want to preface it by saying this is getting into the advanced stuff. And if you're still struggling with like basic points earning and redemption, don't worry about not understanding this next part, because it's at the 201 level of the class, if you will. But so partner bookings are a type of airline booking where you're booking with a partner of one airline who might be like a different physical airline. Let me think of a better way to kind of phrase that. I know like in the course, which you mentioned, it leans heavily on kind of like simple analogies, because I'm behind the facade of a points expert. I'm a pretty simple mind who tries to understand things as if I was like 8 years old. But the way that I teach it is I show like animated like iPhone screen of a text conversation between like American Airlines and British Airways. And American Airlines is like, yo, British Airways, like we got a bunch of customers that want to fly to the UK, but like we're American Airlines and we don't fly there. But you have a bunch of customers who want to fly to America, but you're British Airways. So why don't we just work out a deal where my like loyal customers can fly on your airline and yours can fly on mine, and we'll like call it a partnership. And it's like, okay, cool, sounds good, fam. And like, you know, just real like dumbed down humor. But that's effectively how airline alliances and partnerships work. You have virtually no airline kind of serves the entire world, right? You have super regional carriers. So when they want to give their customers access to fly to places that they don't go, they enter into these partnerships where they can receive kind of collaborative benefits and bookings with other airlines. There's three main airline alliances that are out there. You have Star Alliance, Oneworld, and SkyTeam. And the way that I encourage people to think about partnerships is as if there's only three airlines in the entire world. Those three: Star Alliance, Oneworld, SkyTeam. Each one has 15 to maybe 25 different airlines in it, but you can generally use points from any airline in that partnership to book a flight on any other airline in that partnership. So let's take Oneworld for an example. American Airlines is probably the most known partner in the United States. It's a participant there. If you have a bunch of American airline miles, you can use those to book flights on any of those other carriers like British Airways and Qatar and Alaska Airlines. Even if the flight is physically on a different plane, like you're cashing your American miles and you show up at the airport, your ticket says Alaska Air, the plane says Alaska Air, but you're still going to use those miles. That's generally the high level of how partnerships work. So knowing that opens up a lot of different ways to redeem points and miles for much better value, because you have such different prices in the partnership. Like perhaps the most noteworthy example of this would be SkyTeam, where Delta is kind of like the most well-known participant, at least from the American perspective. But the problem with Delta is that their miles are notoriously awful for international redemptions, right? You'll look at like flights to Paris again. We keep going back to this example. Like United might want like 50,000 miles round trip, and maybe American wants like 65,000 round trip, and then Delta will just roll into 350,000, take it or leave it. You know, it's like laughably higher. And it's like, it's kind of like a known thing about their program. Some people call them Sky Pesos, and it catches people off guard. However, Delta is, I mentioned in SkyTeam, along with Air France and many others, but let's just use Air France as an example. Their program is called Flying Blue. They part of KLM. You can many times book that exact same Delta flight to Paris, like literally the same physical seat that would have cost 250,000 miles. You can book that for like 40,000 miles through Flying Blue and Air France. And again, literally the same seat. Your ticket might look different, but it's the same seat. But doing that, just knowing that you can transfer your Chase points to one of their partners, Air France, who most people would just kind of overlook and think, I've never flown Air France, or like, I have no desire to go to France. Doesn't matter. That's how you can really get the most out of your points and miles. So you kind of exploit the pricing differences between the airlines in this alliance, but it all comes back to like viewing the world through this lens of there's really only three airlines. They are the partnerships. And it doesn't matter if you only have miles with one of those partners. Say it's like United Airlines. If you want to fly Ethiopian Air, you can use your miles for that because they're partners. And there's a lot more nuance to be aware of in terms of like pricing discrepancy, but you have many, many options available to you.
So then do you go to, instead of go to Delta to book the flight, then you go to Air France, you transfer your points to Air France, and then you look for flight through
That's
that
right.
airline. Okay.
Yeah. And this is where it gets a little bit into the weeds, and I don't want to get kind of too lost into like the exceptions to the rule. Generally, yes. You're when you go to redeem your miles, you're always going to do so with whatever partner's miles you're using. So if you're transferring your points to Air France, you will do that booking process through Air France and their website and their customer service, or however you wish to do it. And generally speaking, you can search on their site and you can see all the partner flights available. There are some exceptions to this, which gets in almost to like the 301 level class, where there's kind of like known places to look that will show certain flights and others will not. It's almost like the equivalent of like, I don't know, a store having like more inventory in the back. Like you might walk in and just like, oh, that shelf's empty. There's nothing there. But if you like ask the manager, like, hey, do you have any more of this thing in the back? Like, yeah, of course. Yeah. Anyone who asks, we can do this. So there are some situations where you might search a partner site. It'll be like, oh, no flights to Paris. Tough luck. But we Points and Miles nerds have figured out that if you search like a different airline site in that partnership, that will bring up a hidden flight that is actually available to book. You can't do it online, but if you like call their customer service and you give them the actual flight number and date, they'll be very impressed, by the way. And they'll be like, wow, that is available. How did you know that? And you're like, magic, you know? So again, that's getting like very much into the nuance. Definitely, you know, get more comfortable with the general process before that. But once you get to that really high level, there are many such situations like that where it's like, here's this hidden sneaky flight that I can book using miles that no one has ever heard of from a card that isn't even attached to an airline or a hotel. And ta-da, now I'm lying flat as I fly over the Atlantic.
So since we're on that topic, I want to get, I know this is a very, very vague question, but could you give listeners an idea of a general, what's the average points and miles for business class to get from the US to Europe and to get to Asia? And I know it's going to vary depending on transfer bonuses. There's so many variables, but I think people like to put a number to, okay, what are my points truly worth? I earned 60,000 points from my signing up for the Chase Sapphire Preferred. What's the absolute maximum I can get for that? And what's the kind of average? So that's why I like to go on the one side, because if not, people are running their minds thinking I can get all of these points and all of this value for 60,000 points. That's just unrealistic.
Yep. Yeah. No, happy to answer it. And this is one that we get asked all the time. And I think most people kind of dodge the question like, oh, it really does vary. But without a baseline, people have no idea what to expect. So I'll do my best to answer that. So United States, like to Europe, I would say like a typical good redemption if you're flying in an economy would be 30,000 points per person each way. So call it 60,000 round trip. Most credit cards have sign up bonuses of around that 50 to 60,000. So anytime you see that as a bonus offer, just think to yourself, that's probably a round trip flight in economy to Europe. Business class is going to be roughly double. So call it 120,000 points round trip. There are some kind of rare deals where you'll find it to be less than that. But like if you see that price point for a business class flight to Europe, you generally aren't like clicking away and like, oh, disappointed. You're like, okay, that's good. I'll take that. So 120,000 round trip would be a good ballpark. And then for Asia, it'd be a little bit higher. I'd say closer to like 80,000 points round trip in economy. And again, double it for business class, 160,000, give or take. First class tends to be maybe like 30% more expensive than business class. Like you have this big leap from economy to business, but then business to first is not usually a huge leap. So call it, I don't know, 160 to 170,000 points round trip for first class. And you know, for those listening, an important thing that you learn when you get into points and miles, and I was definitely guilty of this myself, first class on these international flights, particularly to Asia, is not what you're picturing as like first class on a flight from like Atlanta to Houston. Like this is where you find like the ridiculous like lay flat seats, bars in the plane, multi-course meals, showers. Yeah, I've taken a shower on a plane. It's an insane level of treatment that unless you like stumble down that social media rabbit hole and see influencers talking about it, you might not even generally be aware of. But like the quality of service and the product is just unimaginably great, and which is a bad thing. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, Nino. because once you try it once, it's very hard to go back.
Oh my goodness. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'm curious to hear your story because I know you've had many great redemptions, but like the common expression in the hobby is like once you turn left, you won't turn right. Like when you board a plane and go left for the first class cabin, suddenly the economy seats are like half the size that they used to be. Like the food is even worse somehow, and you're just like longing for that. So yeah, but anyway, tell me about
I
your own thoughts on that.
No, it's just I just have a funny story. I remember when my first call with you, Bryce, I had told you like I have these points and I was talking about my strategy and I was telling you that at this time I was going to Europe. I was actually going to London and with layover in London, going to Italy, and I was flying economy and I had gotten in on points. And I thought, why in the world would I book business when I can go get almost 2 trips based on the numbers you're talking about on economy? That's double the points. I get more experiences, more traveling. It was a 9-hour flight. I was like, okay, whatever. I didn't know any better. Then I took my first business trip and I'm sleeping on the plane. Mind you, the first one the actual first business class trip I took to was Japan. So from Houston, it was a 14-hour flight. And I told, it's like never again, never again. Like you said, once you go left, because and I love the analogy, not analogy, but the example you guys like to use about if you're flying over an ocean, typically you're going to do lie flat. And I think that that's especially flights from the US to Europe tend to be overnight. Sometimes they leave at 4 p.m. or 8 p.m., depending on what part of the country you're in. So chances are you can get a pretty good night's rest. And to me, that's what I value. It's just tough when it's your first redemptions. You're looking at, okay, well, I want to take all the pictures. I want to have all the service. I want to get the champagne, the unlimited drinks. Of course, you find a balance between that, but it's very difficult. So Pei and I have talked on this show multiple times about scarcity versus abundance mindset. When you first get into points and miles, you think, okay, these are very rare. I need to hold on to these. I need to milk them, get the most out of it. But then after you get a few months into it and you have a few cards racked up, you have a few 100,000 points, you realize, all right, I'm going to play the long game here. And I listened to you guys' podcast and you guys have been doing it for years. And you guys like to keep that stash of points consistently on a yearly basis that you never really run out and you're able to sustain your points and to continue to travel in this luxurious way. So I love the example and I appreciate you giving the numbers because it's very difficult for people to give numbers sometimes because like, don't hold me accountable. I get it, but people like to know, is this hobby, this getting overwhelmed even worth it? But in reality, the cash price, give us a little bit of the cash price for a business class to economy. If you're saying it's 80,000 points on economy or 120,000 for business, what is that looking like in terms of cash price? So people can get an apples to apples comparison.
Yeah, so again, the usual disclaimers about variants and all that kind of stuff, but an economy flight round trip to Europe is probably in the like $1,100 to $1,400 cash range. Business class is going to be 5,000-ish, maybe 6,000 cash range. So this is where you can also see that the value of the points goes up as you kind of climb that price ladder. Which again, back to kind of the Starbucks analogy, like the value of a free double frappuccino with 3 pumps of vanilla goes up. Make sure that this is something that you want, but that this is where points and miles can really shine, is because you're booking these just outrageously expensive flights that the vast majority of people have no hope of ever booking without crippling themselves financially. And suddenly these are available using points and miles, which we just heard Pei say, like, feel like they're not even yours, right? It's almost like house winnings when you go to the casino. You're like, yeah, of course I'm gonna go to a nice steak dinner. I got all these extra chips in my pocket that I won. Like, it's not even my money. And then for Asia, it goes even higher. Like some of the super premium stuff to Asia, if you're talking like ANA first class, this is probably $15,000 to $20,000 cash. I have flown that product a couple times myself. One such time, 2 days prior to me flying, Justin Bieber and Hailey Bieber were on the exact same plane. Like that's what they're flying to Asia, and I'm doing it with points that I earned from a couple of simple cards. So and I do love your mention of kind of that mindset. Virtually everyone comes into points and miles thinking what you just mentioned. Like, I don't understand why people would redeem for premium cabin when I can just get more travel. And that's okay. Like, please, like, think that. No one's going to kind of try to correct you on, well, sorry, some people will try to tell you otherwise, but don't tell yourself that. But eventually, most people just stumble into a situation like, you know what? There's the premium cabin for a pretty good price. I got a lot of points. I'm going to try it. And then the moment you like sit in your seat, you're just like, I get it now. Yeah. So abundance mindset will take over for most people, not all, and that's okay. But just be open to that kind of change as you move through the hobby.
I want to touch on just really quickly the value of those points right there, because 120,000 points. assuming we're going business class, if you redeem them for cash, which is what people normally do, that's roughly $1,200. 1 cent per point is typically what you're going to get on that redemption. And Bryce just mentioned the average business class flight being 5,000, 6,000. So you've just tripled, quadrupled even, 5x your value of that same dollar. It's the equivalent of, we talk about investments, we talk about investing on this show a lot. It's the equivalent of going in and 5xing your money on an opportunity. Why not do that when you can understand? Now, again, these are high redemption. These do take some skill and they can be overwhelming. But if you have the patience and you're willing to learn it, just like a skill of learning how to make more money or how to make yourself more physically fit, this is just another element to that, where if you really want to put the work in, you can find crazy outsized redemptions. The last kind of in the weeds thing I wanted to mention, because I think this is a good idea for people to know. Talk to me a little bit about repositioning, what that is and how that can be extremely helpful to get to your destination.
Yep. And this kind of speaks to like the flexibility that we were discussing earlier and it making everything easier. So repositioning is a strategy used, I guess, in all of travel, but particularly in points and miles. And it refers to leaving from an airport that is not necessarily your home airport. So I'm a perfect example of this. I'm based out of Columbus, Ohio. We don't have a ton of like airlines or flights here. If I were to run like an award search for Columbus to Japan, I might see an outrageous points price. But if I were to run like Chicago to Japan, it's like 1/3 of the points price. Naturally, you think, why don't I just book like a $100 Southwest flight to Chicago and then catch the flight from there? That's repositioning. So that, or referred to as a repositioning flight, is like a separate itinerary that you book from your home airport to some other origin, usually close by, to catch a better flight deal. A lot of people miss these because we're just kind of programmed when booking travel, just like you put in your home airport, you put in the destination airport, and you just accept what's given to you. But what you see in points and miles is that their deals, like the best deals, tend to be on like particular routes and like more popular routes. Like the fewer stops that you have, the more likely you are to find a good deal. So if you're talking like Chicago to Paris or DC to Paris, like pretty good chance of finding a good deal. But if we're, Albuquerque to Paris, Santa Fe to Paris, now it's like your entire price is being held up by that like Santa Fe to Houston leg, which is a $90 flight anyway. So when you're going through the process of searching to redeem your points, you can't just search at your home airport. In fact, sometimes it makes sense for those first searches to be the hubs. So for me in Columbus, Ohio, my first few searches are out of New York, DC, Chicago, Philly, sometimes even Texas if I have to. And then when you find a deal that looks good, run the same search, but from your home airport, just to see if that first little tiny leg kind of disrupts the entire thing. You do want to be careful with positioning flights for all the obvious reasons, right? You don't want to show up 30 minutes prior to your international flight, landing on a separate airline and having to transit across 3 different terminals. Like you're not going to make it. So, best practice, I tend to leave an overnight. Like I'll have a flight that comes the night prior, stay in an airport hotel, leave the next morning. If you want to push your luck, you're of course welcome to, maybe you land 3 or 4 hours prior to your next departure, but because we're talking about 2 separate itineraries with different airlines, it's not like if your first flight gets delayed on Southwest, you can just like call up Emirates and be like, oh, hey, like help me out. My Southwest flight's delayed. They're like, we don't care. You're not at the airport and this is your origin. So, your options are a little bit more limited.
I think that's very well said. And it shows just the kind of the big picture. You can take this as small as you want, and you can just have your Chase Ultimate Rewards, transfer it to Southwest, transfer it to United to do a Houston to Columbus flight because you want to go visit your family. You don't have the cash to take your family of 5, so you use your points. That's not a bad redemption. All the redemptions are good if it's good for you, right? I know you guys always like to really hone in on that. It could be as simple as that, or you can add in a layer of partner award bookings to get a better value, or you can add partner award bookings and repositioning to help with that. So you can add as many layers to it as possible. I'll give just my example of Japan because of the DFW Japan route. That's a very common one, very easy to find points redemptions if you're looking far out enough. So for me, I used repositioning from Houston. Not that there's not any flights from Houston to Japan, but
Yeah,
I just wanted to get a better value for my money. So I took an American Airlines flight to DFW. I left 6 hours in between just to play it safe. Got to use the flagship lounge at DFW, which was a great experience, by the way, which lounges. We can have a whole another episode on lounges, but we used that. We were able to just lay over there and then fly. We booked it on British Airways. So transferred from Chase to British Airways and used the British Airways to book Japan Airlines flight. So that was the partner award bookings. And then we used the repositioning by going from Houston to Dallas. And that redemption was 80,000 points that one way on that trip. And that cash price was, of course, when you're looking at cash price of flights, it's more expensive if you're looking at one way versus if you're looking at round trip. But it just goes to show, and I've used points multiple times as well to transfer to Southwest. If I had a companion pass and we're going to California to go visit family, just do that for a 3-hour flight. And I use the points for that as well. So the options are there when it comes to points and miles. And I kind of wanted to pivot a little bit to close out the show on.
Hey, before we do, is it okay if I ask you a question? I know you're the host, but I really want to lean into that layers bit, because you're obviously using points and miles at a very high level, and you've been doing so for quite some time. But as we kind of talked about earlier about like, you have to do one layer at a time. And when you skip them, you start to get into overwhelmed territory. So I'm guessing, you know, that when you started in points and miles, you probably weren't like, you know what, I really want to fly first class to Japan twice in 3 years. That's why I'm doing this, right? You probably had more simple expectations or goals. Do you remember like what your thoughts were when you first started, what you were hoping to accomplish, and then how that kind of learning process made you think bigger?
That's exactly where I was actually gonna go right now. Is I wanted to talk. Exactly where I was gonna go. I wanted to talk about the why, about what points and miles unlocks for people, because I don't think people fully understand how life-changing this can be. Because when we think of traveling, most of the time we think of just going to visit family or travel that's forced upon us. But when you talk about the value of traveling to go see things in your life that you probably thought you'd never see, that's where money, just money in general, forget points and miles, money can truly buy those experiences. Money can't buy happiness, but money can buy the experience, which can therefore make you extremely happy and can change the course of your life. So first and foremost, I wanted to say thanks to Bryce and the 10X travel team for bringing that opportunity to us and to me in particular. When I started in points and miles, my goal at the time was I was just on a course to learn everything and anything. And I just wanted to rack up, because I, just like with money, I wanted to have a bunch of money. I didn't know what I was going to spend it on, but I just wanted to have money. I did not have any idea of a destination of where I wanted to go. I just knew one of my limiting factors to going to Europe multiple times a year was money. And I figured, all right, well, if this points and miles game can allow me to go take my wife, take my father-in-law to Europe multiple times a year, why not do that? And as I started learning, as I did my first redemption and I used the points to transfer to Southwest so we could go to Nashville on a 2-hour flight, which looking back, I sometimes smack myself in the head thinking I could have done so much more. But it allowed me to see Tennessee, and I got to see the Smoky Mountains, something that I had been wanting to do. So that was a great redemption, going to Dollywood, spend a week there during Halloween. But that kind of, then I realized, wow, this is a real culture shock, which is not from Texas to Tennessee. But still, I'm like, it made me wonder, like I'd been to Europe before in the past, but it made me wonder what else is out there in this world. And I did a whole episode on my trip to Japan and the eye-opening experience of what that allowed me and my family to see. And that was all because of points and miles. And that's how it changed my life. And Pei has mentioned, so Pei was born in Taiwan, came to this country. So she has different experiences, different life values that she had shared with me before. But it's one thing to hear it from somebody, and it's another thing to go out there and actually experience it for yourself. And this allows you to live your life with, in my opinion, with purpose. So I hope that answers the question to you. And I want to flip that back on you, Bryce. Why did you get started in it? And also, how has your progression evolved from, I'm assuming, traveling by yourself or with your spouse, to now traveling as a family of 5, which I can imagine is its own experience.
That's tougher too, for the record. But yeah, I followed a similar kind of mental path as what you described, as what most do. And I'll share my own story quickly, and I'll tell you how most people progress through this hobby, because it's important to know that getting started. So I started just because I wanted to go on spring break in college. Went to college in Ohio. It was super cold and I was super broke. My only income was giving campus tours. So I made like $200 a week, and I wanted to go to Florida with my friends for spring break. And like, I can't afford this. So I just started Googling like how to save money and such, and found credit card ads. And I was like, this one says it'll give me a free flight. I'll open it and I'll see what happens. And it actually worked. And then that started kind of like the chain of dominoes that's led to, I guess, this podcast right now. But most people follow a similar progression. And I think it's so important for people who are just starting points and miles or are interested in it to understand this, because as I mentioned earlier, what we find is when you take someone off the street, you're like, points and miles are great. You can use it to fly first class to Japan. It just goes right over their head in the same way that a lot, like any other subject, right? If you get into like personal finance, turns out you can actually like alleviate all the stress caused by money. And most people are like, no, that's way off. So most people start with a very simple goal that is practical and economical. It's like, usually I have to go to a wedding next year in Denver, and if this can save me like $300, I'll be thrilled. Or family trips, like kind of the obligatory travel. They try it, it works. And then like the next layer reveals itself at that time. And it's like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if I could use that to like take my wife to Europe. They do that and it works. And then the mindset just keeps on getting bigger. And then it's like, okay, I've always wanted to like shower on a plane. I wonder if I could do that. And eventually you do end up doing all those things. But where most people end up is, one, they end up using their points and miles to do what we say is they become a better or more actualized human. So many would assume that the end goal is just like lavish travel all the time, which for some people it is, and that looks super cool. But for most people, they end up cashing in their points to like maybe visit their family twice a year instead of once, or maybe like go to a wedding that they didn't think they could make. And it just all these like super impactful things, and maybe mixing in some luxury travel too. But it just helps them just be more of the human that they wanted to be. So I encourage folks to kind of think about it through that lens. And then also like the hidden benefit that's at like near the end of the trail of this points and miles, and I'm sure it's true of everything else that people get into, is that you learn a lot about yourself and you come to kind of internalize and understand that you are capable of great things. Like you started like with this topic that sounds like a scam to virtually everyone who hears it at first, and you're just waiting for the catch. And you get yourself to a point where you're like, yeah, maybe what are these transferable points? I'm going to earn some of those. Okay, what's a partner we're booking? And then, months later, you have a new skill that is highly impactful to your life. You learned it on your own. Like as much as anyone creates the coolest teaching resources out there, and we try our best, a lot of it does come from learning on your own. And then you have this like growth and confidence, a new worldview of like, yeah, like I did that. I made this happen. And now like, what else can I do? And that I think is like the real treasure at the end of all of this. And you get to think about those things while lying flat and like sipping Dom Perignon. It's not a bad setup.
You have to grow in confidence as you grow in competence.
Exactly. Right? Well said. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
That's
so.
And I
I'm
think
never
it goes
going to
back
turn right again. I'm going to turn left from now on.
Yeah. Well, you might still sometimes, but I mean, yeah. And the hard part too is when you have like kids who don't understand that this isn't normal. Like my daughter always be like, Daddy, why aren't we flying first class? It's like we're in first class on a domestic flight, but she's like, what's wrong with this filth? Like, why doesn't it lay flat?
I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you, what's your philosophy on that? Because I know some.
I don't have one. I need to. Okay. I need to get on like a parenting podcast and be like, help me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and like, I don't know. It's an open item, but it does create some kind of comical
like mom and dad going to fly first class and you are going to be way back there.
There we go. Yeah.
I remember you mentioned, Bryce, on one of the podcasts that you guys were at the zoo with your daughter.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Please tell that story just quickly. That was hilarious.
Yeah. So I have 3 daughters, all young, under the age of 7. And my oldest has kind of like grown up in like the points to miles hobby, as I do this as a business. And we fly all over and take a lot of trips as families using points. And so her kind of view of things is a little bit warped, right? So we're standing in line at the Columbus Zoo, waiting to, it was like a animal encounter, like they had a snake that you could like pet, we're waiting to pet a snake. There's a relatively long line. And she like tugs on my sleeve and says, Daddy, can we skip this line? Do we have status here? And I had to explain to her that, this isn't an airline. There's not a lounge here to hang out in. We have to wait like everyone else. But it was kind of funny to see like how she perceives all this, and also horrifying when I have to kind of move throughout the rest of my life. Like, hey, we can't just fly first class all the time, whenever. And so, yeah.
No,
that was fun.
I love that. No, and it just goes back to knowing yourself as a person, because I give an example all the time. My father-in-law is, I call him a minimalist. He doesn't really want much. And so he never ever wanted to go. He never saw himself going to Europe because the flight was extremely uncomfortable. He couldn't see himself, back issues, sitting on a plane for that long. Once he flew premium economy, he's like, oh, this isn't pretty bad. I can do this. Like, imagine when you fly business. So then when we went to Japan, we were like, let's get him first class. Let's get him completely pampered. Let's take him all the way there. And I remember, I'll never forget, because my wife and I, we were in business, and after we got off the plane, we were like, how was it? Like, tell us the experience. Like, must have been an amazing thing. The seats were double the size of ours. And he was like, I was pampered way too much. He's like, they hung up. I remember he said this. He's like, they hung up my Levi's and I throw those on the floor at home. It just goes to show that there's something wrong with that. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to have this, like you mentioned. I think the Starbucks analogy is so good. You don't need to maximize to the maximum amount, right? If you just want that cup of tea and you're satisfied with that cup of coffee or that cup of tea, that's totally fine. If that's what brings you value and brings you happiness, then Points and Miles allows you to do that, just in another pathway. We talk about making money, but we talk about the why do you want to make money? And this is, I treat Points and Miles as I do with money, because it is a currency that can enhance your quality of life. And when you're combining both Points and Miles with making money and doing these experiences and having a fulfilled life, you realize that is what life is for. Life is you have these opportunities because of what you're able to do with money and with Points and Miles. And you mentioned with the flexibility, if you can take care of your financial situation and have passive income coming in, it opens up this door that you have the flexibility to just say, hey, do you want to go to Paris next week? Hey, do you want to go? And you have the options because you have points. So you can save some of your money that you've built up and you have investing. You let the power of compounding go on multiple times, and you can use your Points and Miles and consistently do it. Nothing to even say about if you have a business and how you can rack up these points. There's a lot to dive into with this. And I think, just Bryce, I could have you on like multiple shows, and because there's so many, you've provided so much value to my life, to my family's life, and to everybody. What you guys are at, like 400,000 or 500,000 people in your Facebook group, which is, it's crazy just to have that community. And what I wanted to end on is by telling people again, as I go back to, I'm not paid by Bryce or anything. I'm just a happy customer, and I have, we only have people on the show that we have personally worked with. And I want to again recommend, take the 10X Travel course, the 10X Travel Plus membership. Bryce, can you mention a little bit about what that membership entails? I know Pei had questions, and we had some other friends of ours that were wanting to know what that does.
Yeah, so 10X Travel Plus is our paid membership program, where you pay a little bit of money. I think it's $199 per year, and it just makes everything about Points and Miles easier by giving you access to more of our resources. So members can have 2 one-on-one Zoom consults per year. You mentioned that you got me, and actually that's kind of rare these days. I only keep 1 slot left per week. We have 15 other people can help with those, but you can ask your questions. You can show up and say, I have these types of points and I want to do this, modify your strategy and kind of just fine tune it a bit. Very much like the conversation we're having right now in this podcast. You get 1 free award booking per year, where one of our pros will actually redeem your points for you. And it just makes the entire process of learning and accelerating to, those upper levels that we talk about much, much faster. So we have, a lot of members in that now, and I feel like we could probably grow it pretty considerably if we wanted to. We're careful to make sure that the service stays at a level that's, to a point where people are asking you to come on their podcasts and talk about how great it was. But it's just our way of trying to help with a more hands-on service and kind of do the strategy and legwork for you.
And I got a t-shirt, which that's a very big opening kind of line. When somebody sees you with that shirt, and I've seen people at the airport, I'm like, hey, that person has it, you're in this special community, this special niche that you're like, I know what that person knows, especially if you see them on a business class flight. You're like, wow, because that just goes to show how big the community is. To me, that's really cool, because you're already in a sub community of a sub community. To find someone in that underground world, it's like, wow, this is extremely cool. The last thing that I wanted you to mention, because I found a lot of value in this, the 10X Travel wallet. Talk to us about that, because that's been huge for me to keep track of. Pei asked me the other day, how do you keep track of all these 26 cards that you have? And when I show friends and family, they're like, that's crazy. How do you do it? Talk to me about the wallet.
Yeah, this is a relatively new tool for us. So we have an online tool that's called My 10X. The 10X wallet is part of that. It's just an online platform. It's totally free, and it makes every aspect of managing your Points and Miles strategy easier. It's a bit like kind of what mint.com was for budgeting and such. You can connect to all of your banks, sync securely. It'll pull in your points balances, what cards you have. It'll send you reminders about when certain cards are coming up for renewal. It'll look at your current cards and points and recommend the next best one for a particular strategy you're trying to deploy. And it just takes all of that administrative hassle and burden and dread and just simplifies it and automates it. We found that this is one of the big barriers to people entering the hobby. Like, that sounds cool. I would love first class flights, but the idea of like managing 5 different credit cards across 3 different points programs sounds pretty daunting. So we're like, cool, let's build a solution for it. We have big plans for additional features to roll out for that in the near future, but right now, totally free platform. Anyone can sign up, and it just makes becoming a Points and Miles Pro so much easier.
Yeah,
After
I
this,
love.
you're gonna get all the signups.
I mean,
Yeah.
I hope so. Yeah. Well, and then, it'll be like, wait, where'd all the award space go for those Japan flights? Like, people listen to, and they're booking them like crazy. And, so we get that all the time. Like, aren't you worried this is like going to become so big that it's like going to take off with the award space? And like, people have been saying that for 10 years and like still
Well,
flying whenever I want.
it's scarcity versus abundance, right? It's
Yeah.
when you have that, you're not trying to just keep it to yourself. You wanted to share that message. That's why we wanted to have you on, is to share that message with people. I'm not worried that someone's going to listen and then take my next trip where I wanted to go. Well, so be it. I'll pivot, I'll go somewhere else, or I'll go there at a future time. I think just allowing people to, or giving people the opportunity to have those experiences, I think that just makes the world a better place. In all honesty, just being able to travel and see different cultures. So once again, Bryce, I can't thank you enough, both from a personal standpoint of, like I mentioned, what 10x Travel has done for myself, for my family, being able to see the world and get there in a very comfortable manner, I think has been incredible. And I've shared multiple times with multiple people, Pei, all my friends, business partners, because no matter what place you are in life, whether you're a young college kid wanting to go on spring break, or you're in your 60s, like my father-in-law, who wants to just see the world, I think and everything in between, there's an option for there. And you guys have completely changed the Points and Miles space with all the content that you're just willing to give. I know Pei is like this. Pei and her husband Mike, teaching IBC, they're willing to just give out free content because they feel like they have the message and it's their responsibility to share that message to the world. So I very much appreciate that and value that from you coming on to you just helping us as we've done. So Pei, anything you want to finish up on? You want to wrap up?
No,
I mean,
I learned so much today and I really appreciate it. I think I'm going to redo the course, sign up for the card management system, and then think about joining your community I want to be the VIP.
I just look forward to the hopeful photo I get someday of Pei just like reclining in that first class seat, getting that first glass of champagne or orange juice or whatever, and like, oh yes, this is it. Like, that's my new.
I flew business class from Houston to Spain. Yeah,
Oh,
Barcelona.
nice.
And I swear, the minute I got in there, I was flat the whole time. I'm like,
Yep.
I'm gonna milk every second. Can I eat horizontal?
The answer is yes. I've done it. Yeah. It's challenging, but it can be done. But yeah, Nina, thank you for the kind words and for, spreading the word about what we're doing at 10x Travel and for just doing it at an amazing level yourself. I so enjoy like watching your own use of Points and Miles and travels, and hopefully this message will reach some other folks who join the same path and ultimately realize the same success that you have. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Thanks, Bryce. And thank you everybody for tuning in. We hope you got some good value. I know I did. I know Pei did. So thanks everybody. Have a good one.